Welcome to Applicant to Alumni. I'm Joel.
And this is Mark with the podcast that helps build a lifelong relationship between your school and your students.
Thank you for joining as we build a journey that lasts a lifetime.
Welcome, everybody, back to Applicant to Alumni. I am Mark.
And this is Joel, and it's very exciting to be back with you. We've had a little break. I've had some big things happen in lives lately. Mark and I are both working on our dissertations, but more important for you, you had something big happen last week. What was that?
I did have something big. My oldest daughter got married, so now I have a son-in-law. It's kind of crazy, but it was an exciting wedding. Lots of support from family. It was really, really cool, and it gave me a reason to not work on my dissertation for a few days.
Yeah, and you know, one stressful thing to another stressful thing.
Right.
But congratulations on that. The pictures that you shared were amazing.
Thank you.
That was awesome. I know in the time we were away, I got to visit my granddaughter for a little bit, and then that was incredible. And then I was out at a conference in Washington State. Got to see our buddy Tom while I was out there. So that was great. Hey, Tom, I know you'll be listening. He listens every time.
He does.
Big supporter of Applicant to Alumni. But yeah, so it's been good, but we realized we haven't had an episode lately. And so it's time. So what are we going to talk about today?
You know what? I think it's important to discuss something that will probably resonate with the audience, the higher education. So, we both work in Christian higher education and feel passionate about that. And I think one of the things right now, sometimes it feels like many of the principles and ideas that Christian higher ed is founded on are coming under attack, right? So one of the things that I think institutions are really having to pay attention to is, with all of the outside influences, are they able to stay true to the mission to which they're called, right? So, you have these Christian universities that are really trying to impact the lives of the students that are attending in many ways. Obviously, we want to equip them with a great education, but the spiritual factor and the importance of Christian higher ed is well documented, that it really does impact our culture and our society in positive ways, from how much revenue is generated by the alum to just the impact that they can have in their societies with what they're getting involved in, local churches, those types of things. So I thought it would be interesting just to talk about the idea of mission drift, this idea of, are you staying true to your mission or not? And then maybe even how that impacts some of the key stakeholders for the universities, and particularly alumni, which is right up your alley.
And I think we'll get into this too, is sometimes there's actual mission drift, and then sometimes there's perceived mission drift.
Right.
And they can both be incredibly damaging to your reputation as a school. And I've dealt with some of both in the past, and probably you have as well. So I think there's a great list of things we can talk about.
And I think one of the things too, so often it can be confused because universities can go through change, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not staying true to their mission.
Right.
There's a lot of conversation on that. Just because you're changing an element, and maybe it even is in your mission statement, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're drifting. And so there's a fine line that has to be walked there. Drifting is, I like the idea that it depicts, if you're on a boat and you just kind of slowly drifting, you don't even recognize it, and you look up and you're like, whoa, I'm not where I used to be. Right. And it's that idea that sometimes in higher education, if we're not careful, because of all of the influences that we have, you can kind of look up and see that you're not exactly where you are aligned to be.
Yeah. And I loved your point of doing something a little differently is not the same as mission drift.
Right.
That's being current.
Correct.
And being aware of what's working today and what's not anymore. So that's all stuff we can get into for sure. But I know we want to start off about the importance of Christian higher ed.
Yeah.
And so for sure, what's your philosophy on that right now?
Well, there's so many things. I obviously we both work for Christian universities,
Mm-hmm.
and I really get excited and passionate when I see the impact that the students that graduate and go on, what they do. And sometimes it's really big things that you want to put in your magazine and have
Yeah,
an
yeah,
alumni
yeah, yeah.
spotlight. And sometimes it's just somebody becomes a pastor at a small church in a rural community, and they're making a difference in that area. And
Right.
that's such a great impact. Um, and often, I know at our university, we talk about finding things that are bigger than ourselves, that
Mm-hmm.
impact God's kingdom and not just doing
Right.
everything for ourselves. And so when you see that, how people can impact their overall culture and society, but even in their community. That's where you see the importance of Christian higher education, because when people
Yep.
are thinking about what they can do for others, not necessarily themselves, it has such a great impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Christian higher ed. And facts are, it's not for everyone.
Right.
Um, there's some majors that not many Christian universities have, or things like that, and that's just a fact. But the value that's placed on bringing Christ into the overall education, and your education being kingdom minded,
Hmm.
and I think schools like ours have moved so far past that. Well, you have to be in ministry to be doing kingdom work,
Right.
and they use the word ministry as full-time profession,
Sure.
not as a lifestyle. And like I think in broadening that word ministry, you and I are technically then in ministry, because we are helping people fulfill their calling in life.
Definitely.
So, now it's your business majors. How are they learning how to incorporate their faith into what they're getting taught in the traditional business curriculum?
Right.
But how are they bringing Christian ethics and governance into what they're doing? How
Right.
are teachers going into what's becoming an ever more diluted liberal mindset in education? How are they trying to bring Christ into that, or at least a lifestyle of Christianity
Right.
into that? It's vital in higher ed institutions that we keep that.
Well, and
Uh,
everybody has a sphere of influence,
yeah.
regardless of their major or their profession.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's as simple as creating a friendship in the office that leads to a conversation
Mm-hmm.
that leads to somebody, being curious about Christ. I think
Mm-hmm.
everybody is seeking. Sometimes we don't even know. And so
Yeah.
when you have more Christians in the workplace that can just be friends, I don't
Yeah.
think there's not this magic potion. It's relational,
Yep.
and when you live a life of Christ, hopefully, it's attractive to others. And so sometimes it's just living your life that way. And you don't have to, put your Bible on your desk or wear a big cross chain or
Yeah.
anything like that. It's just living your life and letting that be the expression that attracts other people.
Yeah.
And then there's this ripple effect, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
a big culture guy. And so I understand, with culture, everything that you do is either positive or negative towards culture. So if you go into we could say a non-Christian working environment, but you are living a Christ-like life,
Right.
that's going to impact culture
Mm-hmm.
in some way. And sometimes just the importance of educating students with a Christian mindset, then as they go out, they impact their community. And I think
Yep.
that that alone makes Christian higher education vital
Mm-hmm.
to our culture.
Yep. So, leading into our next little topic here, it wasn't too long ago in our lifetimes, I think this is very true. Christian colleges existed. Some people didn't care for them, but nobody really fought against them.
Right.
And now it seems like culture has shifted so much against Christianity in general
Right.
that schools like ours, and hundreds, if not thousands, across the country are coming under attack for promoting certain things,
Sure.
and for just existing. Um, how do you think that's affecting Christian schools, colleges? I mean, we could talk about our specific schools,
Right.
but I think it's happening everywhere.
Yeah,
So, what
I
do you
think
think that's
so.
causing Christian higher ed to experience right now?
It's so competitive. If you just look at the higher education landscape and not even necessarily the Christian higher ed space, it is so competitive. There's less and less students. There's more talk of how you don't need an education or you don't want student loan debt and all of those things. And so you have less
Right.
and less students that are graduating from high school and attending college. And then in, the looming demographic cliff that's coming in
Mm-hmm.
2025, where there'll just be less students,
Right.
it's creating an extremely competitive market in an already extremely competitive market.
Right.
So
Right.
in order to stay relevant, everybody's trying to figure out what's that niche thing that I can do that's going to make
Mm-hmm.
me relevant. I think that's where you can be in danger of mission drift, because
Okay.
the focus sometimes shifts from educating in a Christ-like way to hitting an enrollment or revenue goal.
Right.
And I
Right.
don't think necessarily it's egregious or it's this horrible decision that you make, but the idea of drift is maybe you have three or four relatively consequential but smaller decisions that you make that aren't bad by themselves, but
Right.
you start to see I'm going to do something that maybe I wouldn't have done 10 years ago
Yeah.
because I want to try to attract this market.
Yep.
Or I'm going to change my stance on something because culturally it's more acceptable
Mm-hmm.
to view things differently. And when you start to do that, I think you're in danger of drifting.
Yep. I think a easy to understand example of a drift that happens unintentionally. You have whatever Christian college that enrollment has steadily but slowly declined,
Mhm.
and they look at options on how to grow. Athletics is often a go-to right away to say, hey, let's increase roster size, let's do some things. And by doing that, it's usually something that they want to have happen quickly. And they'll say, hey, we need more football players, soccer players for women and men's teams, whatever it is. You might suddenly have 13 teams at your school or 20 teams that could help you bring in an extra 150 students.
Right.
And that's significant. Well, then in the midst of that, coaches are like, hey, they're giving me some more resources to increase roster size. And if you don't have an intentional choice up front to say, we're going to do this, but every student has to be mission fit and culture fit,
Sure. Yep.
you slowly start to accept a different type of student, slightly different, maybe not as high academic or something, or maybe not as strong as a spiritual background in the past. And then 5 years later, 7 years later, you're like, how did our athletic department become this
Right.
renegade group that might
Well,
be winning?
yeah.
But
Using that example and taking it a step further, when you're increasing those teams or even creating new sports at your school, if you bring in a coach that's
mm-hmm.
not a great mission fit, maybe they
Right.
are a very successful coach, and maybe they say, well, I can be okay with your statement of faith.
Yep.
It's not my bag, but I
Yeah.
can. That's all right. What happens then is, let's say they have 15 athletes that they're influencing, more than
Mm-hmm.
anybody on the
Yep.
campus, spending more
Yep.
time. If they're only teaching them the fundamentals of an athletic team and not also instilling in them the principles of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
you've missed out on discipling a large
Yeah.
number of students. And
Yep.
so then I think you used a great example. Exponentially down the road, let's say that coach coaches for 10 years, it's hundreds of students that they would have come in contact with that maybe,
Yep.
and not saying they did anything bad, but you lose the ability
Yep.
to disciple, and all of a sudden the product that you're graduating is not
Yep.
as
And
grounded as
yeah,
maybe before.
and there could be no scandal, there could be no major issues.
And
It's
the team could
just
be successful.
yeah, and it's just suddenly when you look back at it from an initial perspective, and then that 7 to 10 year later, you're like, where did that change happen?
Right.
And you can't define a moment, but you could go back slowly and look at it. And I've heard of that happening in theater programs where they've brought in a director who just was all theater, awesome, amazing, but like you just said, wasn't 100% aligned with whatever the school's mission fit is.
Right.
And those passions and those beliefs end up coming out over a period of time.
Sure.
And next thing you know, you have a program that doesn't align with the rest of the school. So those are really good examples of unintentional mission drift that happened.
Yeah.
Um, And then we'll get into what that does for like alumni perceptions and stuff. But, and then there's, even intentional
Sure.
mission drift. And I think a large obvious example goes way back in American history. Harvard University, founded as a religious
Right.
school, putting out pastors and everything, they intentionally chose to drift from that initial thing, and they are still a very successful school.
Yes.
Obviously, fundraising's through the roof, but that's definite drift from a foundational point that they chose to do.
And interestingly, Yale was founded because they saw Harvard drift, and they
Yeah.
wanted to have a university that stayed true to the mission.
Yep.
And now, while those are great institutions of academia, neither one of them would tell you that they are spiritual icons in our communities.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So, and you're right. Those are
Yep.
choices that were made, that were
Mm-hmm.
intentional. And that's the thing. Mission drift is interesting. I mean, some people choose it. Some people say, no,
Mm-hmm.
I want to go this
Yes. Right.
direction.
Right.
And so we're going to make these decisions.
Yep.
But kind of to your point earlier, when that happens, now you're, especially at a university level, you have so many constituents, so many stakeholders that you're representing, that comes into play. So
Yeah.
how does the alumni feel? How do if you're affiliated with a particular religious denomination,
Mm-hmm.
how do the denominational leaders feel?
Right.
And so there's all of those.
Yeah.
It's a pretty dynamic
Yeah.
situation.
And you're also then dealing with at most schools, faculty are a very powerful group on campus.
Right.
Some schools, they almost have absolute total power. Others, they share it, with
Right.
cabinet, with vice presidents, whatever. But sometimes if you're not super careful, and I'm going to do my best not to give away schools I'm talking about here, but if they're not super careful on hiring faculty who are totally in alignment, then you're going to get powerful people who start to push a different agenda, and that will also cause mission
Correct.
drift.
Yeah.
And and that becomes very societal. I mean, there's hotbed topics that we could point out all day long, saying the school either has to choose to be more accepting and inclusive, but that's going to take you away from your mission drift, or are you going to hold true, knowing that there will be a portion of culture and society that won't fit at your school and will view you as mean,
Right.
and terrible.
And those are hard decisions, because typically what that means is you are purposefully making a decision not to perhaps grow in an area. And so,
Right.
in so many tuition driven schools, their revenue is based on the kids coming in.
Yep.
And so, and that's the other motivation that you face. You say, well, in order for this Christian institution to continue to grow, we need to bring people in. But are you bringing in, are you changing your standards so that you can hit goals, which then causes you to drift?
Yeah. Right. So now let's segue into something, and we can jump back to that as topics do. But my background, you're heavy in enrollment and admissions, and so let's talk about how can an intentional choice to do something different, not mission drift, but doing something different, help you in enrollment. So a college that was a Bible college wants to go more liberal arts. How can that help with enrollment? So that's a choice.
Right.
Doesn't change mission, but how does that help, making that choice to change things a little bit? How does that help someone from your perspective?
I think it boils down to leadership. You have to have leadership in place that is going to stay true to the mission. And so if you say, well, we're going to change some things, but we're still filtering it through this idea that we are a Christ-centered institution, and our goal is to build up individuals to have a life of service through Christian principles. So if you have leadership that believes that, then even when you're changing things, you're not changing fundamentally who you are. You're changing structures, you're changing maybe procedures, and even a whole system, but you're not changing the core of who you are.
Right.
Which can be hard. As you're making those changes, sometimes those subtle things happen. So you have to have leadership that's not only grounded in the mission, but recognizes that there are things that can cause mission drift, and they're able to institute strategies to avoid it.
Yeah, right.
And I
And I
think
think when you say leadership, this is what I think. So tell me if you agree or if there's even more to it. Obviously, the immediate leadership is your president, your version of cabinet, whatever that is, or advisory council or something. Your academic leaders, your student life leaders, but it also brings in like board members.
sure,
I'd be careful to say it brings in donors because you don't want to give the donors too much power.
they already have a lot.
Yeah. So, but is that who you're thinking of? Your
For sure.
president, your cabinet, board
The
members?
board of trustees is huge because they represent, the university as a whole. So you
Yeah.
have,
Yeah.
board of trustees that love the university and they have an affiliation, but they may live on the other side of the country from where you're
Yeah. Right.
located.
Right. Right.
So to have them bought in
Yep.
is very important because their influence is pretty far reaching.
Yeah. I think when you have all of those levels on the same page, it helps you avoid mission drift.
For
When
sure.
you have leadership that are just a group of yes men or yes women, then you can fall into mission drift because
Right.
then you're following the ideas of one or two people.
Right. It's just like so many other things. If it is important to you and you say, mission drift can happen to anybody. I mean, I think
Yeah.
the biggest pitfall could be if you think, well, we're very grounded missionally, and I don't think that would happen to us. If that's your thinking, you're in trouble
Yeah.
because it can
Yeah.
happen.
If you're not preventing it.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
So my perspective, having dealt with alumni now at two schools as in leadership, but then worked at two others, at schools that have made these conscious choices to be more diverse in their academic offerings and different things like that. It's interesting because it was a conscious decision made to benefit the entire school, but you get some negative blowback from alum. And the biggest thing I dealt with, the one college where I was the alumni director, used to be a Bible college. Then it was a college that branched into education, some counseling, things like that. And then it went full liberal arts, everything. So the alum from the Bible college era called those changes complete mission drift because the school fundamentally changed.
Right.
Well, that's not an inaccurate statement. It's not also totally getting the entire concept. Yes, the school fundamentally changed, but the school didn't fundamentally change its mission.
Right.
They just offered more diverse offerings, totally based on a Christian perspective and a kingdom-minded
Right. And you could totally
mindset.
argue that you have more of an impact because you're sending people into every professional arena
Yes. Yep.
that your school represents.
Yep. And then I've experienced this too, and maybe you have. When you expand majors and add different things, and in general, academic requirements have gone up. It's taking more credits to get a major in certain things, which then means you might not be able to offer as many Bible or theology or Christian education courses. So when I graduated from school, everybody got a minor in Bible, no matter what your major was. So we had 30 something hours just in the Bible and theology for the denomination we were part of. Well, that's not true anymore at the school, and that bothers some alumni. But when they really start to push and they listen to the responses, what the school did is they took all of those classes and took the most important key components of every one and created a whole new Christian ed curriculum so that the students still have to take the major things. But the students would have been having almost 200 credits if they would have done what used to be and what's now. And it's not doable.
Right.
So
and that's
it's
one
not
of those things where the university, to stay relevant, made changes that somebody could perceive as you're drifting, but you're really not.
And I 100% agree. And I think what you have to do as a school at that point is be so intentional and deliberate in how you communicate.
Right.
And to the point of feeling like you're overkilling
the
communication. If if you just put out the statement that we're doing this and this, but you don't give every detail, if you leave room for interpretation, it's going to be interpreted wrong.
Correct. Yeah.
So overshare and be over clear.
Well, I think too, one thing that you can do as a university is look at the product that you're putting out there,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, what are the students doing that are coming to your school and then leaving your school?
Right.
And if you can say they're going into society and making a positive
Mm-hmm.
impact
Yep.
on a Christian level, I think that's super important,
Yep.
because that's if that's not happening, then you probably have drifted, because what they're learning in their time on your campus is not
Right.
uh,
Right.
is not manifesting itself in their lives.
Yeah. And one other thing I've dealt with is there's always students who attended your Christian college for the wrong reasons. And so their life after that time there is not maybe going to represent what we want it to be. And people always point to those people. Well, they're so and so. They're not doing anything for the Lord. Well,
Right.
you're right. But let's not let the minority of issues determine the overall views
You'd
of the
like to
school.
think seeds were planted, and you and
Yes,
I
right.
both coached,
Yeah,
and I coached a lot of athletes that would openly say they came to the university to play the sport.
yeah.
They didn't care that it was Christian. They were getting a
Hmm.
scholarship. They were getting an
Yep.
opportunity to continue their career. And some of those found Christ while they
Yes.
were athletes at the
But
university.
and another thing too in that one, and I know we both default to athletics quite a bit, but a lot of those athletes knew what to say, knew
Yeah,
how to write their essay. They knew enough about the church and Christianity to say, "Oh yeah, I'm good."
right.
But when they got your trust as a coach, they would say, "Yeah, coach, I was just here
Yep.
to play." And then they get saved, or years later because of that influence. So to me that's awesome, and that's a win for everybody. And I don't view that as mission drift. I don't view that as anything, because that happened no matter what your Christian school was like, no
Right.
matter when.
Yep.
So that's always
Exactly
been
right.
true. Yeah. So we've talked about intentional choices that change the school and how that affects the views and everything. um, so now let's kind of talk about those. We'll use that athletic things as an example. You made the choices to add more students, and it led to changes. So it's an accidental mission drift, but you're now not the same school that you were, and
Right.
how that becomes a problem. And this is probably more of an alumni and a donor thing, because admissions will still be recruiting as many, the students to the majors that are offered and everything. So now you get into an issue where, when the school has fundamentally changed, and for my college this would be a problem, not every college but for mine, if suddenly we were intentionally not or accepting students with no statement of faith.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
That has worked for some. My school, that would not work. That would be total mission drift, and alumni and donors would not accept that.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that you need to be very careful with, decisions that you're making to grow or whatever, that end up becoming philosophy change, process change, procedure change,
Right.
suddenly are going to alienate your
Yeah,
community.
because what you don't want to do, most Christian universities have some form of chapel or
Mm-hmm.
a student worship service during the week. You don't want to look down the row and see the majority of the people have no faith.
Right.
You want it to be, obviously there's going to be some people at your university who are there for different reasons. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
they're close or they like the major or whatever, but you want there to be more Christians at your university to influence. And when you start to see that reverse or shift,
Mm-hmm.
you can have difficult drift because the student's mindset changes. And a lot of times that will happen. I alluded to it before with leadership and with faculty. If you have
Yeah.
people that aren't, if they say, well, yeah, I can live with what you're saying, and
Yeah.
they're just kind of like that, if they're not totally bought in and they're in a position of leadership, that's going to come out somehow in a statement, something they write, something they say to a student. And so those are the types of things that, as that happens more and more, that's when you drift, because then you have, maybe a president or a cabinet or even a board of trustees saying, hey, this is who we are. But you have a lot of people that are affiliated with the university that say, I'm not that.
Yeah.
And then you have that conflict, and you start to see fracture. And that's, the whole, talked a little bit about it before, the cultural influences can start to kind of creep in there. And if you're not staying tried and true to who you are, then you drift.
Yeah. Well, I think this has been great. And I like it when you and I just get to talk and just kind of share ideas and go sort of unscripted. I know we had a topic today, but we didn't have an intentional list of questions and stuff. Does this mean we're like becoming actual experts in our area?
I don't know. That's a pretty bold statement.
So in transparency, we did talk about some things that we're working on in our dissertation, and again, how they relate to each other. So it's kind of fun when we get to do that, and our passions come through. But I think just to sum up, we've talked about mission drift, whether it's intentional or accidental. We've talked about how that's impacted your campus, your students, your faculty, and then your donor pool, and in your community pool. And one of the things I remember us talking about a lot was intentionally making choices and being transparent about them.
Right.
And helps avoid some of that apparent mission drift. So that was good stuff. But I think we're looking at our nugget of the day time, huh?
Time for nugget of the day. So what do you got for us?
Well, I think we both have learned this recently. We're dealing with some things, for me, particularly dissertation-wise and fundraising-wise, that have these huge long-term goals. Dissertation, I have a year to finish this 150 rough page thing with 150 sources. That's huge. And then fundraising, we got $1.5 million project coming up, and then probably a multi-million dollar project the next year. And that's intimidating. And it's really hard to keep your motivation going when you have things huge like that. So what I want to encourage people is to find smaller success when you're going to the long-term large success. So smaller goals, mini goals along the way.
That's great.
So, maybe for dissertation, it's, I need 25 sources on this particular topic.
Right.
Instead of thinking of 150, 25, I can knock that out in a week.
Those small wins will keep you motivated.
Yeah. And, in fundraising, it's, all right, I've got a $1.5 million project, but this month I want to come up with 50,000. You're realistic about it. And for you, it's probably breaking it down in monthly objectives for enrollment.
Yep, definitely. Yeah. I mean, we look at the full year and we have goals that we want to hit, but then we break that down, by weeks, weekly goals we have. And sometimes you have a couple of weeks, you don't hit that goal. And then when you do hit it, you're like, oh, it's motivating. And it's like, oh, there's the success.
And celebrate that, and celebrate the other people in your area that are achieving that. So that's a big thing. So that's my nugget. Give yourself some smaller, successful moments to get to your huge goal. Otherwise, we burn out too fast.
I love it. Well, this has been fun, man. This has been a good episode.
Yep.
It's been some great conversation on mission drift and the influences of people for universities to higher education. Yep. So I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us on Applicant to Alumni, where we are building a journey that lasts a lifetime.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Have a good one.
Thanks for listening. And if you have any questions or suggestions, please email us at
applicant2alumni@gmail.com. That's applicant, 2, alumni@gmail.com.
And follow us on Twitter
at app2alum, app, 2 alum.
And Instagram at
app2alumni. That's app, 2 alumni. The 2 is in there every time.